God versus science, faith versus reason. It's a story we've all heard, right? This idea of a huge ongoing war where you've got to pick a side. Are you with the smart, rational, scientific crowd, or are you on the side of that old, outdated faith? But what if that whole story is just plain wrong? What if the idea of this epic war is actually a myth, something invented much, much later? In this explainer, we're going to dig into the evidence that Christianity didn't just get along with science. It actually provided the very foundation that made modern science even possible. All right, so first things first, we have to tackle this popular story head on because even though it's shaky, it's everywhere. Where did this idea of a constant war even come from? Well, this idea has a name. Historians call it the conflict thesis. It's basically the belief that science and religion are just locked in this permanent, to-the-death battle for truth. The thinking goes, as science moves forward, faith has to shrink back. But here's the thing. This entire idea is built on some seriously flimsy historical myths. Okay, so let's just tear into two of the biggest myths that prop this whole thing up. First, the Dark Ages. This picture of 1,000 years where the church just stomped out all learning and everyone was ignorant. It's largely an invention. It came from Renaissance scholars who, frankly, wanted to make themselves look extra smart by making the previous era look extra dumb. And second, the flat earth myth. Oh man. The idea that Columbus had to convince a bunch of flat earthers in the church? It's just complete fiction. Educated people in the Christian Middle Ages knew the earth was a sphere. They'd known it for over 1,000 years. Okay, you might be thinking, but what about the martyrs? What about the people who were killed by the church for their scientific beliefs? And the poster child for this is always Giordano Bruno's. So let's take a closer look at his story. So the popular myth paints Bruno as this hero, a martyr who was executed because he had these advanced scientific ideas, like believing in aliens on other worlds. But the actual historical record tells a really different story. He was tried and executed for some major theological heresies. I mean, things like denying that Jesus was God, teaching stuff that struck at the very core of Christian belief. Sure, his astronomical ideas were part of the whole picture, but they weren't the reason he was executed. The real conflict wasn't about science versus religion, it was about heresy versus orthodoxy. So if the story of a war is a myth, then what is the real story? Well, let's get to it, because the truth is way more interesting. The argument here isn't just that Christianity wasn't at war with science, but that it actually provided the fertile soil where science could take root and grow. Just think about it for a second. Before you can even begin to do science, before you pick up a single test tube, you have to make a few giant assumptions. You have to believe that the world out there is real, not just some illusion. You have to believe that it's orderly and predictable, that it follows rules and isn't just random and chaotic. And maybe the biggest leap of all, you have to believe that our little human minds can actually understand that order. Now, those aren't scientific conclusions. They're philosophical starting points. They're really articles of faith. And this right here shows you why that matters so much. If you believe the world is run by a bunch of moody, unpredictable gods who are always fighting with each other, why on earth would you expect to find consistent, universal laws? You wouldn't. You'd expect chaos and random acts of magic. But if you believed the universe was created by a single, rational, and consistent God, a God who doesn't change, then you have every reason to expect an orderly, logical, and discoverable reality. The Christian worldview gave science the trust it needed to even get started. And this is exactly why, for so many of the pioneers of science, their work wasn't just a secular job. As this quote says, they truly believed that by studying the laws of nature, they were actually getting a glimpse into the mind of the one who wrote those laws in the first place. There was this beautiful concept that guided them called God's two books. The idea was simple. The Bible is the book of God's words, that's special revelation. And nature is the book of God's works, that's general revelation. They weren't seen as enemies. They were just two different volumes written by the same author, each telling a crucial part of the story. For them, studying nature was a form of worship. And this wasn't just some abstract philosophical idea, It was the personal, burning motivation for one of the greatest scientific minds in all of human history. Let's talk about Johannes Kepler. Johannes Kepler. The name is legendary in the world of astronomy. This is the guy who figured out that planets move in ellipses, not perfect circles. He paved the way for Isaac Newton's theory of gravity, an absolute mathematical genius, and also a profoundly devout Christian. So this is the key. It's right here. In Kepler's own words, why did he do science? He believed that God made us with rational minds, in his own image, specifically so that we could understand the rational universe he created. For Kepler, figuring out a law of planetary motion was, as he famously put it, thinking God's thoughts after him. It was an act of deep, profound worship. And this way of thinking had some serious theological backup. For instance, the great reformer John Calvin taught that when the Bible talks about nature, like the sun rising, it's using the everyday language of normal people. It's describing things how they appear to us. It was never meant to be a science textbook. And this idea gave scientists like Kepler the theological freedom they needed to go investigate the physical world on its own terms, without feeling like it was contradicting the Bible. I know what you're thinking. I can hear you right now. This all sounds great, but what about the big one? What about Galileo? Wasn't he totally persecuted by the church for his science? Yeah, the Galileo affair is always held up as the ultimate trump card, the knockout punch for the conflict thesis. But the reality was so much more complicated. It wasn't a simple case of the Bible versus the telescope. It was really a clash between two competing scientific ideas. On one side, you had the old established science from Aristotle, which put a stationary Earth at the center of everything. That was the view the church authorities had accepted. And on the other side, you had Galileo, with brand new evidence for the Copernican model. So in many ways, it was really a battle of old science versus new science. And it got all tangled up in politics, authority, and frankly, some big personalities. So why are we digging up all this old history? What does it matter today? Well, because understanding where science actually came from has massive implications for how we see faith and reason right now. First and foremost, knowing this history frees us from a totally false and really damaging choice. It shows us that faith and reason aren't enemies. They've been partners for centuries. So Christians, far from having to be against science, can and should be on the front lines of discovery, just like Kepler was. And this just changes how you look at the world. It means that when a biologist is marveling at the insane complexity of a single cell, or an astronomer is looking at a galaxy billions of light years away, they're not taking a step away from God. They're actually taking a step closer, getting a better look at the incredible handiwork of the divine artist. So let's just sum it all up. The big takeaways here are pretty simple, but they're powerful. Number one, the so-called war between science and Christianity is a modern myth, not a historical fact. Number two, the Christian worldview, with its belief in a rational creator, is what provided the necessary soil for modern science to even grow. And number three, this means faith and reason aren't enemies. They are historic partners in the search for truth. This incredible partnership between Christianity and reason literally shaped the world we live in. But if this worldview gives us such a solid foundation for science, it begs another massive question. What about our foundation for right and wrong? Can we have objective morality, real good and evil without God? Well, that's exactly what we're going to explore next time.